Good morning, Rosai. It is a zechus to be able to learn with you. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there in person, but look forward to Meretz Hashem. We'll be back by Tuesday afternoon. Look forward to Meretz Hashem to seeing everyone in Shir in Meretz Hashem B'Shat Tov Mitzlachas on Wednesday morning. But it is a zechus nevertheless to continue to learn, at least virtually. I thank you to all of our sponsors who are listed again in the description on the YouTube channel as well as on the podcast. Today's daf is Pei Daled 84, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Pei Gimel Amadays 83b, and we are picking up a Pruei Rosh. So actually, no, I take it back. We are picking up Aval Orel. 2 lines up from the bottom. Aval Orel Onin V'Yoshe Bazar. So remember again, going through the list of people. First, we went through the list of Kohanim who are Chayim Mis B'dei Shemayim, or just say circumstances which generate liability of Mis B'dei Shemayim. And then the Mishnah created a list, or the Brights created a list, that an Avel, a Kohen who does the Avodah as an Avel, as a mourner, Orel, uncircumcised, Yosef, sitting. So the halach is all three of these things, as much as they're prohibited, if a Kohen does it, he's in violation of a lav and not misa b'dei shemayim. Says the Gemara. So now the Gemara is going to go through each of these one by one. Arel minolan. From where do we know that if a Kohen does the avodah as an arel, that it is quote unquote only a lav and not misa b'dei shemayim? So the truth is, this is not explicitly mentioned in the Torah. So it's just the lashon over here is, we did not learn this from the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which means it was not explicitly said in the Torah. Yecheskel ben Buzi, Navi Yecheskel came along, and what did Yecheskel say? Kol ben nechar arel leif, top of Pei Daled 84a, va'arel basar lo yava amikdashi. It's interesting enough. So Yecheskel says Kol ben nechar, again, who's a non-Jew, arel leiv, uncircumcised heart, va'arel basar, and someone who's literally physically uncircumcised should not come to the mikdash to serve me. So ultimately, again, here we see now, again, obviously, this is not a doraisa, but rather, again, this is a pasuk from Navi, and therefore, again, when the Gemara says that it's a lav, really what it means is, Rashi points out over here, "V'hainu ashara midivrei kabbalah ba'alma v'lo loki Allah." So when we say Allah, really is what we call divrei kabbalah. D'Rabbanan, learned out from the Nevi'im. So if a Kohen were to do this service as an arel, someone who's uncircumcised. Now remember again, the case of where a Kohen is not circumcised is the case of mesu echav machmas milah, where they couldn't do a bris milah, right? Because if someone again can have a bris milah but remains in an uncircumcised state, there's a whole different layer of liability attached to that. We're talking about over here where this particular Kohen could not have a milah because his brothers had died as a result of bris milah beforehand. So such an individual, although he is allowed, quote unquote, to remain uncircumcised, he is not allowed to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Where do we learn it out from? Pasuk in Yecheskel. Good. Next, Onein. And remember again, Onein is someone, now it's interesting, by the way, if you notice, the Gemara uses both lashon of Onein and Avel. Now for our purposes, again, Onein is a state of, a period of time between death and burial. So the halach is that a Kohen can't do the avodah during that time, and if he does so, he is chayiv. It's a lav. It's a lav. It says Gemara Minolan. Where do you know that from? Onein Minolan. Second line from the top, 84a, Pei Daled Amud T'chsev u'min mikdash lo yezeh, v'lo yechalel es mikdash elokav. Because the pasuk says it's actually by the Kohen Gadol. Pasuk says by the Kohen Gadol, actually specifically by Aaron after the death of Nadav and Avihu. Aaron cannot leave the mikdash, and he should not profane the mikdash of his God. Now, the pasuk is telling me that even though Aaron had encountered and experienced such a catastrophic and overwhelming loss, he was not permitted to leave the mikdash. He had to continue to do the avodah. So the Gemara dashes something very important. The Gemara says, "Ha'acher shelo yatsa chilo." What do you see from here? It's tafka the Kohen Gadol who has to continue to serve as an onein. But if someone else were to serve as an onein, they would in fact profane temple service. So from here you see the fact that the Kohen Gadol has to serve as an onein / avel indicates to us that other Kohanim may not serve in that state. So now we'll say, so where the Gemara is holding right now is, therefore, if a Kohen does serve in a state of aninos, he's in violation of a lav, a prohibition. Gemara says, 1 second. Maybe we should make a gzeir shava, chilul to truma, hearkening back to yesterday's daf. It's not again hearkening back to yesterday's daf. So remember again, on one hand it says, by avelos it says chilel, and by truma it says chilel. So we should say, just like if a Kohen who is tamei eats truma, he's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. So too if a Kohen who's an avel does the avodah, he should also be chai misa b'di shamayim. Amali Rav Adler Rabba v'neilav chilo mitruma mal halon b'misa avkam b'misa, and say just like again by a kohen who's tamei who eats truma. We'll just call it truma for now on. But again, the case is a tamei kohen who eats truma is chai misa b'di shamayim. So just like by truma is misa b'di shamayim, so too again onein should also be misa b'di shamayim. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. First of all, just understand, the prohibition for a Kohen to do the avoda as an onin is not written explicitly. It's inferred. The fact that the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to leave the mikdash but has to serve even in a state of aninos tells us that a regular Kohen can't serve in a state of aninos. So it's not explicit, it's inferred. So the Gemara says, so this is something that is learned out from an inference. And there's a principle, the chaldavra haba min haklal in danin osa b'gzir shala. Interesting, the Gemara espouses a principle. What's the principle? Anything that is learned out from an inference itself cannot be part of a gzir shala, which logically it's saying is, in order to be part of the gzir shala, you need two explicit concepts, and you can build a bridge between them. If one of those concepts is not explicit, but rather learned out by inference, you cannot use it for gzir shala. Interesting. Okay, Yosef Minala. Next. How do I know that if a Kohen does the avodah sitting, that he is in violation of a lav? Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Ki bo bachar Hashem Elokecha mikol shvatecha la'amod lishares. So the pasuk says by the Kohanim, Hashem chose the Kohen to go ahead and serve. Hashem chose the Kohen from amongst all of the tribes, la'amod, to stand and to serve. What do you see from here? La'amida b'charta v'lo liyeshiva, that dafka avoda, sacrificial service, temple service, has to be done standing and not sitting. Therefore, if a Kohen goes there and sits during the avoda, then halacha l'maisa, he's in violation of a lav. Balmum. Next. What about a blemished Kohen? So remember again, so what happens if a blemished Kohen does the avoda? Rabbi Omer b'misa, Rabbi says he's put to death. The chum say bashara, it's a lav. So let's analyze. My time the Rabbi, what's Rabbi's logic that he says if a blemished Kohen does the avoda is chayiv misa? What's his logic? So the Gemara says dichsev ach ala parochas lo yavo. The pasuk says that again, if a Kohen has a mum, he should not come to the parochas. And then the rest of the pasuk is v'lo yichalel es mikdashi ki ani Hashem mikadasham. He should not profane my mikdash. Lashon of chilul. So the Gemara says v'yolif chilul mitruma. Make a gzira shava from balmum to truma. Just like it says mal lahalon b'misa. Just like by truma, if you have a tamei kohen who eats truma, it's chai misa b'di shamayim avkan b'misa. So too, if a balmum does the avoda, he's also chai misa. So that's Rabbi's logic. Gzira shava chilul from truma to balmum. B'neilif chilul minosar. So we'll say again, this is like chazar from yesterday. But remember, it also says chilul by nosar. And nosar is a chi of karis. So we should make a gzir shava between balmum and nosar and say just like nosar is chi of karis, so too balmum is chi of karis. To which the Gemara says mal halam b'karis afkan b'karis mistabra mitruma havadei l'melech. No, it makes more sense to learn out balmum from truma than from nosar. Why? Shekein psul haguf mi psul haguf. Because remember again, the common denominator between truma and balmum is, in both cases, you're dealing with a disqualified kohen, right? Balmum, the kohen himself has a blemish, and the case of truma is where you have a kohen who is tamei, eating truma, consuming truma. So it makes more sense to learn out physical disqualification from physical disqualification. Adarabo, so just the opposite. Minosar havalei l'melech. No, you should learn out from nosar. Why? Shekein kodesh pnim pigol v'nosar. Because again, it has a lot of commonalities. Number one, they're both kodesh. Number two, again, it's all taking place inside of the mikdash. And furthermore, again, it's subject to pigul and osar. Ella mitame shishimesh gamar psul haguf mi psul haguf kodesh pnim. I'm sorry, I just lost the place. Adraba minosar v'leilaf shekein kodesh pnim pigul v'nosar. Again, the Gemara suggests we should learn out from nosar rather than from truma. Ella mitame shishimesh gamar. Rather, again, it is better. No, we'd rather learn it out from the case. Okay, so the Gemara is not switching gears. We're going to learn out ultimately again from tamei shishimesh. Now, who's tamei shishimesh? That's the kohen who is tamei, who does the avoda. Again, this is more like we had this yesterday and Sunday as well. So the Gemara says ella mitame shishimesh gamar psul haguf mi psul haguf. To which the Gemara says, Kodesh pnim pigol v'nosar, mi kodesh pnim pigol v'nosar. Okay, so we'll say, so this is Rabbi's logic. So Rabbi's logic ultimately, again, is that halacha l'maisa. Again, Different ways you can learn it out, different possibilities of learning it out, but Lamaisa results in a Chiyav Misa. Okay, so we'll say, remember, trying to figure out over here, if a Baal Mum does the Avoda, what is the halacha? Rebbe says Chiyav Misa. Again, a couple of different possibilities as to where he learns it out from. What about the Rabbanon? Rabbanon Amarkra, Bo, V'lo B'Baal Mum. The Rabbanon say the pasuk says Bo. The pasuk says this is about the Kohen who does the Avoda in a state of Tumah. It says ultimately again, this individual is Chayiv Misa, but not a Baal Mum. Okay, that's the logic. So the Gemara goes weiter. Hizid de Me'ila, what about the case? So we'll say, so therefore, fundamental machlokes, again, the Gemara ends off with the machlokes, is not machriya, does not decide. Kohen Baal Mum does the avoda. So halacha l'maisa, again, what, right, this is, we had this, right, so we'll say, so I'll just tell you, the way the Rambam passes is like the Chachamim, that if a Kohen Baal Mum does the avoda, it is not chiyav misa b'dei shemayim, rather, again, it is a lav. It is a lav. So pass like the Chachamim. Okay, so next, Hezid be'mi'ila. What about a case of intentional mi'ila? So what's the status here? Rabbi Omer b'misa. Rabbi says there's a chiyav misa. The Chachamim Omer ba'azhara. And the Chachamim say that it's a lav. Okay, so says the Gemara. So what's going on over here? My time with Rabbi. What's Rabbi's logic? Why does Rabbi say that ultimately intentional mi'ila is misa? So Gemara says, Rabbi Abo Gamar chet mitruma. Gzir shava of chet from truma. It says chet ultimately by mi'ila. It says chet by truma. Mal halon b'misa, just like by truma. And again on both sides, all the cases of truma are a Kohen who's tamei partaking of truma. That's the case of truma. So just like by truma, there's the chiyav misa b'dei shamayim. Afkan misa, so too over here by hizid b'mi'ila, intentional mi'ila, there'll be misa b'dei shamayim as well. V'Rabbanan amri. The Rabbanan on the other hand say no. V'Rabbanan amri amar kra bo v'lo b'mi'ila. The Rabbanan say again, once again, when is there or where is there misi b'dei shamayim? That'll be the case ultimately again of the Kohen who goes ahead and intentionally does the avodah in a state of tumah, but l'maisa not hizid b'mi'ila. And I will say once again, the Rambam Paskin is like the Chachamim. Again, actually, the Maramaka for that, the Ein Mishpat for that is on Amud Aleph. The Rambam on yesterday's Daf, Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, the Rambam Paskin is like the Chachamim, that if a person intentionally goes in and violates mi'ila, that it is not misi b'dei shamayim, instead it is a lav, it is a prohibition. Incredible. All right, so now back to the Mishnah. Zar sheshimish b'mikdash. So remember again, I will say this was Shabbos' Daf, right? So the Mishnah said this was the end of Pei Aleph Amud Beis. Zar sheshimish b'mikdash. If a non-Kohen intentionally, right, serves in the Beis Hamikdash, Rabbi Akiva or b'chenek, the Chachamim Omrim b'dei shamayim. Rabbi Akiva says chenek, strangulation, and the Chachamim say it's misa b'dei shamayim. Either way, not good. But lamaisa again, machlokes as to what the punishment is. So let's analyze. Tanya, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, ne'amar kan v'azar hakorev yumas, v'ne'amar lahalon kol hakorev el mishkan Hashem yomos. So we'll say, so that we're going to go over here, so Rabbi Shmuel, in this Brisa, Rabbi Shmuel says as follows. On one end it says, V'azara karev yumas. So this is talking about if a non-Kohen does the avoda. Then the Gemara quotes the second pasuk. What's the second pasuk? Kol hakorev al mishkan Hashem yamos, him tamnu ligvoa. So again, this is actually talking about by Adas Korach. But again, in any event, the Gemara quotes another pasuk, and it says, whoever comes close to the Mishkan Hashem, Yomos will die. Mal lahalon b'dei shamayim, just like by that second pasuk, it's talking about b'dei shamayim. Now Rashi points out over here. Look at Rashi. Mal lahalon. Rashi is right across in Tosos Elo. Mal lahalon b'dei shamayim. De'memasayim v'chamishim ish dekorach besrufim ksiv. So remember again, this is by the 250 followers of Korach who were killed, were incinerated. By right, this is when they brought the Torahs. So they were killed misi b'dei shamayim. So interestingly enough, Rabbi Shmuel is making a gzera shava. It says by a non-Kohen who does the avoda yamos v'azara karev, or I should say yumas, and it says by adas korach kol hakarev el mishkan Hashem yamos. Now they were also zarim; they were non-Kohen who did the avoda, so they were killed. Mal lahalon, just like by Korach b'dei shamayim, they were killed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Afkan b'dei shamayim, so too over here it's misi b'dei shamayim, and therefore again this is Rabbi Shmuel's raya, that if a non-Kohen does the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, he is killed with misa b'dei shamayim. Rabbi Akiva says no. Ne'amar kan v'azara karev yumas, v'ne'amar lahalon v'hanovi hahu o choleim hachalom hahu yumas. So we'll say interesting. Rabbi Akiva makes a different gzera shalom. It says by the non-Kohen who does the avodah yumas, and it says by the Navi, this is the false prophet. the false prophet. These are individuals who try to go ahead and get Klal Yisrael to worship Avodah Zarah. So the pasuk says you must by them as well. And therefore what? Just like by the Navi, by the false prophet, Ma lahalon beskila, afkan beskila. Just like the false prophet is killed with skila, so too the Zar who does the Avodah is also killed with skila. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says no. Ma lahalon bechenek, afkan bechenek. Now Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri disagrees. In other words, he's disagreeing with Rabbi Akiva about the death penalty for the false prophet. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says it's skila, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri holds that it's chenek. But either way, what we're going to do is we're going to build a gzer shava between false prophet, between the Navi, between the false prophet, and the non-Kohen who does the avoda. So again, according to Rabbi Akiva, that's going to result in the punishment of skila, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's going to result in the punishment of chenek. So the Gemara says, by the way, by my kamiflagi Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Akiva. So first of all, before the first machlokes is between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, right? Rabbi Shmuel is making the gzer shava of va'azara karev yumas, and he's comparing it to the followers of Korach. Just like the followers of Korach were killed Misri Shamayim, so too again the Zar, the non-Kohen who does the Avodah, is also killed Misri Shamayim. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Rabbi Akiva compares the Zar to the false prophet. Just like the false prophet is killed with skila, so too the Zar is killed with skila. So it says the Gemara, what's their machlokes? Rabbi Akiva. We'll say first white line on the bottom, Peidal 84a. Rabbi Akiva suffered done in yumas mi yumas, ve'in done in yumas mi yamos. Oh, Rabbi Akiva says like this. If we're going to make a gzer shava, let's do it right. How do you make a gzer shava? With two identical words. So the word is yumas. It says yumas by Zar, and it says yumas by the false prophet. By Adas Korach, by the followers of Korach, the lashon of the pasuk is yamos, not yumas. Rabbi Akiva says I'd rather make a gzer shava with identical words. Rabbi Shmuel says done in hedyot mi hedyot, vein done in hedyot mi navi. Rabbi Shmuel, on the other hand, says no, it's better to make a gzer shava between the Zar and ultimately Adas Korach. Why? Because they were both ordinary people. As opposed to the Zar and the Navi again is a chashuv guy. He's a chashuv guy, right? Remember again, the only way the false prophet gets any kind of what's the word, like legitimacy, is if somehow he's proven himself as a guy rabba, as a big guy. So therefore Rabbi Shmuel will say better to learn out ordinary people from ordinary people. So the Zar from Adas Korach, and not to learn out the Zar from the Navi. To which the Gemara Rabbi Akiva, Kevan Shiediach in lecha hedyot gadol mizeh. Incredible. And Rabbi Akiva says, well, maybe this Navi once upon a time was a big deal. But once he's now trying to convince Jews to worship idolatry, ein lecha hedyot Yosef, he said, there's no more ordinary of a person than this. Very, very profound. Very profound. So the Gemara says like this. So it's almost as if what Rabbi Akiva is saying to a certain degree is like your identity and your status cannot simply be based on past accomplishments. Your identity and your status is fundamentally tethered to what you are here and now. Incredible yisod. So the Gemara goes on. But my commit figure Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan. So by the way, now we understand that we have a fundamental machlokes ultimately in between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Fine. Now, but in actually the false prophet himself is machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Akiva says skila, Rabbi Yochanan says chenek. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, what's their machlokes? The Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbanan. They're arguing, their machlokes is the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbanan. What's their machlokes? The sanyo, Navi shiediach b'skila. If a Navi tries to convince people to worship idolatry, he's killed with skila. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Chinek. Rabbi Shimon says, no, chenek. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Omer Chenek. Ha'anan Tanan, Rabbi Akiva Omer Bechenek. But one second, we have on record that Rabbi Akiva also says Chenek. So you just said before that Rabbi Akiva holds that a Navi who tries to convince people to do idolatry ultimately is killed by skila. But yet Rabbi Akiva is on record in the Mishnah is saying that it's a chi of Chenek. Trei Tanai Valibud Rabbi Akiva. Truth is, there's a machlokes Rabbi Akiva said. Two different Tanoim. One Tano said Rabbi Akiva holds that a false prophet is chayiv skila, and one opinion said Rabbi Akiva holds that he's chayiv chanek. Masnisin Rabbi Shimon v'alibud Rabbi Akiva, Braisa Rabbana v'alibud Rabbi Akiva. Okay, our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Shimon's understanding of Rabbi Akiva, and the Braisa reflects the Rabbanan's view of Rabbi Akiva. Incredible. So I will say, halacha l'maisa, how do we pass? In this last case over here, in this last case, The Rambam Paskin is like the Chachamim, that if a Zar goes ahead and does the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, non-Kohen does the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, that halacha l'maisa, he is chayiv misa bidei shamayim. Incredible. Rabbosai, hadrun alach Elohein nisrafin, mazel tov, mazel tov. Rabbosai, now we begin. Amud Beis, Peidal Amud Beis, 84b. Rabbosai, new Mishnah. Okay, so now what we are clearly doing is we are moving Baruch Hashem, through the various misos based in. So the Mishnah now says, these are the individuals who get chenek. Now, remember again, we spoke about strangulation a little bit. We spoke about strangulation a little bit, right? Again, you have the cloth around the neck, pull the rope from both ends, and ultimately strangle the individual. Again, we'll get more into this later on. So the Gemara says, so who gets chenek? Again, we'll talk more about the actual penalty of chenek in just a little bit. Who gets chenek? When is there chenek liability? Hamakev avimo. And when a person hits his father or his mother, gonev nefesh miyisrael, you kidnap someone. Zakin mamri al pi bezdin. So we're going to talk about this, about the zakin mamri al pi bezdin. This zakin is if you have a situation where the bezdin rules a certain way, and there's a particular judge who's in the minority. I remember again, the way that it works is so you follow the majority. What happens if you have a judge who refuses to yield to the majority? He refuses. That's called the zaken mamre, rebellious sage. So again, he's put to death with chenek. Again, more about that later. Navi Ashaker, false prophet, which again, interestingly enough, ties into what we just learned before. Apparently, this Mishnah reflects that view, that ultimately he killed with chenek. Someone who prophesizes in the name of idolatry. Someone who commits adultery. All right, so remember again, this last case is interesting. Remember again, we had this case that halacha l'maisa, a bas kohen who commits adultery is given the unique punishment of sreifa. What happens if Rachel, right? We'll call Rachel as the bas kohen. Witnesses show up, Reuben and Shimon show up, and they claim that Rachel committed adultery. So they're trying to make Rachel liable to sreifa. Now it turns out that two more witnesses come up and say, Reuben and Shimon, impossible. You could not have seen Rachel commit adultery. Why? Because at the time you're saying that she committed adultery, you were with us. Imanu hayisim, you were with us. So now generally again, so Edim Zomin get a reciprocal punishment, which would seem to indicate that Allah Chalamaysa, just like they wanted to give her sreifa, so too they should get sreifa. But we'll see this more in the Gemara, but we'll discuss the idea that we'll learn after Psukim that it's only the Bas Kohen herself who gets sreifa. The Edim Zomin don't get sreifa, rather what do they get? They get chenek. Same idea, ba'ala. Same thing, the man who commits adultery with the Bas Kohen is also put to death, but not with sreifa, because sreifa is unique for her. Rather, again, he gets chenek. Okay, incredible. So we'll say, let's analyze some interesting Gemara over here. So how do you know that if one hits, right, literally one strikes their father or their mother, that Allah Chalamaisa, the penalty is a death penalty? Incredible. For striking one's parent, the death penalty of chenek. Where do you know this from? The pasuk says, if you hit your father or your mother, you're put to death. So the Gemara says, V'chol misamur b'torah stam eino ela chenek. And in general, this is actually very interesting, and in general, whenever the Torah gives an unqualified death penalty, whenever the Torah says you put to death, if it doesn't give a specific type of death penalty, apparently the default is chenek. We've seen that before already. The default is chenek. The Gemara says, Ema ad katale mikdol. 1 second. How do you know, maybe when it says, Make avevi ima mos yumas, that if you hit your mother or your father, you're put to death, maybe it's some of the case where you hit them and you killed them. In other words, a person hit their parent and killed their parent. That's where there's a death penalty. To which the Gemara says, So here's the problem. The problem is, that, what does that mean? That the Torah is telling me that if a person kills his father, he's chayiv chenek. Now the Gemara is operating under the assumption that chenek is considered to be a more lenient form of death penalty. So what that's going to say is, if you kill a stam person, a regular person, just not your father, you're executed by sayif, a more chomer form, beheading, a more chomer form of death. But if you kill your parent, you're chayiv with chenek, you're right, you put death with chenek, a more lenient form of death. What does that mean? 1 second. Now that's fine if you understand that chenek in general is a more lenient form of death penalty. But if you say that chenek is more chomer, then what is there to say? Ella, so we'll say, so we're just trying to figure out over here, here's what I know. The pasuk says, if you hit your mother and father, you're put to death. Stam unqualified death penalty is chenek. What we're trying to figure out over here is, what does it mean you hit them? You hit them and you injured them, or you hit them and you killed them? To which the Gemara says very interesting. Ela midichsiv make ish vames mos yumas uksiv obeeva hikol biyado vayamos. So I'll say this is very interesting. Look at other cases where the Torah speaks about hitting, and notice the intriguing lashon that the Torah uses. Right? Maki ish vames. If a man hits his fellow and the other person dies, then the hitter is put to death. Or obeivayko, if you hit someone with animosity, right, biyado, with your hand, vayamos, and he dies. And if you notice in both of these psukim, what do you see? You see that there's a qualifier. The pasuk says, and Reuven hit Shimon, and what happened? Shimon died. So there's a qualifier, which indicates to us what? Shma mina kol heicha diika hakos stam lav misahu. The fact that there needs to be a qualifier, Reuven hit Shimon and Shimon died, indicates to us that in the stam case, where it just says Reuven hit Shimon, then what does that mean? That means hitting without death. Hitting without death. Incredible. So the Gemara says, so now what I have over here is as follows. So now, we've just proven this first point. Remember again, what was the first thing in the Mishnah? We're trying to figure out who is liable to chenek. First case, a person hits his father or his mother. Where do I learn that out from? If a person hits his father or mother, it's not talking about killing them. Because if it was killing them, it would have said make vayamos. The fact that it just says makev is just hitting with an injury. And what's the halacha? Most you must. When Torah gives you an unqualified death penalty, that automatically means chenek. So we've proven this first line in the Mishnah. Incredible. Now, by the way, I will say the Gemara says v'itzrich lemichtav makeish v'itzrich lemichtav kol make nefesh. Now, interestingly enough, the Torah says there seems to be two redundant psukim. On one hand, it says maki ish vames mos yumas. If you hit someone and they die, you'll be put to death. And then it says v'chomake nefesh. Right, the pasuk is v'chomake nefesh lefi edim. Right, here it says harotzeach. So the pasuk says if you kill a nefesh. So it says right. It says komake maki ish vames. If you hit an ish, a man, and he dies, you're put to death. And then it says komake nefesh, which seems like if you kill a person, you're put to death. Why do you need both of those psukim? So both say this is fascinating. Because of Rahman maki ish vames. If the Torah would have just said maki ish, if you kill, now ish means a man. If you kill a man, you're put to death. I would have thought like this: Havamina ish de bar mitzvahim katan lo. I would have thought like this: when are you liable for killing someone? When you kill a man. Why? Because a man is liable to a whole bunch of mitzvahs. So it makes perfect sense. Katan lo. But if you kill a child, you're not liable. Not liable, right? The child's not chayv mitzvahs. Therefore, kasef rachmana kol make nefesh. Therefore, the Torah says, no, what does nefesh mean? Nefesh means anyone, right? Any living thing. So even if you chasrom kill a child, you're also chayiv. The Gemara says, listen to this. Because of Rahman, kol make nefesh. If the Torah would have just said kol make nefesh, I would have thought like this: Havamina, afilu nifalin, afilu ben shmona. I would have thought that even if you kill a fetus, right? Whether this is in utero, right, or a fetus that has not yet been proven to be viable, or a baby who was born after 8 months. Now, the Gemara operates under the assumption that a baby born in the 8th month is a non-viable baby, not going to live. So I would have thought that you would be chayiv for killing even a fetus that's not proven to be viable, or a fetus in utero, or a baby born in the 8th month. So the Gemara says, therefore, tzrichi. So therefore, we'll say, therefore, I need both. So interestingly enough, so kol make nefesh teaches me I'm chayiv for going ahead and killing all viable things, right? In other words, I should say differently. Really, I need both, right? Because if it would have just said maki ish, I would have thought just adults. Therefore, it says kol nefesh. But if it would have just said kol nefesh, I would have thought any living thing, even if it's not viable, kamashlan, you're only chayiv if you kill a viable entity. Therefore, the Gemara says, you need both of them. Ve'ema afagavlu avid bechabura. So this is interesting. Going back to parents now. So now we've established if a person goes ahead and hits his parents, chas v'sholem, he's chayiv mises chayiv chenek. Maybe I should be liable even if I hit my parent and don't cause an injury. I don't cause a wound. As the Gemara says, just for the act of hitting, there should be a death penalty. But one second, Alamatan we learned, if you hit your mother or father, you're not chayiv until you cause an injury. See, it's very interesting. If a person, let's say, slaps his parent and there's no injury, there's no chabura, there's no injury. So again, obviously not good, but not chayiv misa. You're only chayiv misa if you cause a chabura. To which the Gemara says, so how do you know this? In other words, if you understand over here that makya ave v'imo just means literally hitting one's parent, and therefore you chayiv chenek, maybe it just means even if you hit them without an injury. How do you know that in order to be liable death penalty for hitting one's parent, you have to cause bodily harm? How do we know that? This is very interesting. Amakar, the pasuk says, "Makya adam, umakya behema." The pasuk juxtaposes one who injures a person and who injures an animal. Ma makya behema ad David bechabura. Just like if you injure an animal, there's only liability if you cause an injury, right? You have to cause a wound. Right? You go over, you slap a cow, all right, it's weird, but lamaisa, you're not chayiv. There's no penalty for that. There's no monetary compensation for that. Just like makya behema, you're only chayiv if you cause an injury. So the juxtaposition, makya adam, you're also only chayiv for striking a person if you cause an injury. Incredible. The Gemara says, Ma makeh behema ad avid b'chabura. Dichsiv ba nefesh af makeh adam ad avid chabura. So too again, there's only liability for striking one's parents if one causes an injury. So I will say this is incredibly important. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here is that a person strikes their parent, obviously bad, but not a death penalty unless, of course, you strike them and cause some type of injury. So I'm asking for Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, 1 second. If that's the case, that we're jumping out to animal, that you're only liable for injuring an animal if your mamish cause a chabura, cause a wound, if that's the case, hechisha ba'avanim. Let's say I go over to Ruvain's animal and I load Ruvain's animal up with a whole load of stones. So I'm not physically injuring the animal, but I'm diminishing its strength. You're going to tell me that there's no liability because there's no physical wound? You're going to say I'm not chayiv nabosin? Of course I'm going to be chayiv there. Why? Because at the end of the day, I actively diminished the value and the strength of the animal. So you see from here that even by an animal, if you don't cause a physical injury, you're chayiv. Elo im eino inyel nefesh behema daha I nami hechisham ba'avanim chayiv. So if that's the case, I don't really need nefesh. Right? I don't really need nefesh behema or makya adam makya behema. Right? It says nefesh. Right, the nefesh pasuk, by the way, is makeh nefesh behema. So I don't really. This is interesting. I don't need nefesh behema to teach me that I have to cause an injury. Why? Because by an animal, the truth is, even if you don't cause an injury, but you clearly do something that substantially diminishes the koach of the animal, you're going to be chayiv. So if I don't need nefesh behema to teach me about animal injury, then what? Daha inami yechisha ba'avanim chayiv tineyu inyel nefesh adam. So use it for nefesh adam. Use it for nefesh adam. El hekesha lamali. So therefore, why do I need the hekesh? So therefore, it turns out, interestingly enough, that the way we're learning this out, ultimately, again, it's from nefesh behema, right? Umak nefesh will teach me that even by a person, I'm only chayiv if I injure, right? If I hit my parent, I'm only chayiv if I actually cause bodily harm. But if a person just hits or slaps and there's no subsequent bodily harm from that, then Allah Chalamaysa, there's not a death penalty involved in that. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, el hekesha lamali, so then what do I need the hekesh between nefesh behema or makya adam makya? What was the lashon? Right, makya nefesh. No, I'm sorry. Makya adam makya behema. Right. So what? In other words, obviously the pasuk juxtaposes injuring an animal and injuring a person. So what does that juxtaposition teach me? This is very interesting. The both say this is fascinating. I'm sorry. So therefore, what is the hekesh? Makeh behema, makeh adam. So what is the juxtaposition of injuring a person, injuring an animal? What does that teach me? The first thing the Gemara says is comes to teach me the ruling of the Bechizkiah. What's the ruling of the Bechizkiah? So take a look at Rashi for just a moment. We actually had this before in the Gemara. The Sanya the Bechizkiah. The Baba Kamal liftor chaybe misos shogege minat hashlomin mamake b'melo chalakta. So it's very interesting. So the Bechizkiah says like this. The Bechizkiah holds. We know there's a concept of kimli b'drabamine, right? Which means that halach l'mais, if you do something that generates capital liability, you are exempt from any financial liability. The Bechizkiah holds like this. Even if you do something b'shogeg, if it's the kind of act that had you done it b'mezid, you would be exempt from financial liability. Even if you do it b'shogeg, you're exempt from financial liability. Okay? And they will learn it out from that hekesh. The Gemara says, that's fine, but hanicha leman de islay tana de bechizkiah. That's fine if you hold like tana de bechizkiah. Elaman de less lay tana de bechizkiah hekesha lamali. But if you don't hold of the tana de bechizkiah, which many don't, in other words, both say many reject that concept, and they say the only time that you're patur from monetary compensation is when you are liable to a death penalty. But if you did something b'shogeg and therefore not liable to death, you are liable to pay. So if you reject that limud, then what do you do with the hekesh? So Gemara says, so we'll say, remember again, just so you understand, we're just trying to figure out over here, the pasuk juxtaposes injuring a person, injuring an animal. So what do I need that for? To which the Gemara, listen to this, Ma make behema l'refuah pater, af make adam l'refuah pater. Ooh, fascinating. Just like what happens if Ruvain's animal is injured and I'm trying to help Ruvain's animal, and I end up injuring it more. So if I injure the animal in the context of trying to heal it, there's no liability for that. So the Gemara learns out the juxtaposition is the same thing with a person. If I'm trying to help someone and I end up injuring them, I am not liable for that injury. That's the juxtaposition. So the Gemara says, the Bailahu, Ben, listen to this case. Ben, Mau Shiyaki's Dom La'aviv. You're supposed to listen to this. Let's say again, we have a father Avram, and Avram has a son Yitzchak. And Avram is ill, and he needs bloodletting. Because remember, bloodletting was the preferred manner of all medicinal healing. So now, Yitzchak wants to help his father. What's the problem? What do we just say? That if a son injures his father, right, and drawing blood is certainly an injury, he's chayiv chenek. But here, the son's intention is not to injure his father, just the opposite. His intention is to help. So is he allowed to do this or not? So the Gemara says, Rav Masna says, yes, it is permitted. Why? It's incredible. Because again, you see another Yid in distress, you could help them out, especially if that Yid is your father. What's the shayla? Of course you should help. Rav Dimi Bar Chinna Amar, Make Adam Umake Behema. Right? Rav Dimi Bar Chinna says the juxtaposition. Torah says Make Adam Make Behema. It juxtaposes it to teach us what? Just like if you injure an animal in the course of trying to help, in the course of trying to heal it, you're pater. So too, if you injure someone in the course of trying to heal them, you are pater as well. So everyone will say it's interesting. Both of these opinions are agreeing, namely that a son is permitted to go out and do bloodletting on his father, even though he's going to quote unquote injure him. But since the injury is for medicinal purposes, therefore it is going to be mutter. Incredible. So I'll say. So just to finish, this, by the way, just so you should know, we'll do this more on Wednesday, but this sugya is a fascinating sugya because again, let's say again, a son is a doctor, he wants to treat his father. Is he allowed to treat his father? Or again, a child is a nurse and wants to draw blood. Or just even not a nurse, a child is caring for a parent, right? And wants to go ahead, test blood sugar or different things like this. Is a child allowed to do these things for a parent, knowing that essentially they're doing a chabura, they're quote unquote injuring the parent, even though the injury is not for injury purpose. The injury is ultimately for refuah, but is a child allowed to do it or not? Now, both of the opinions mentioned here seem to indicate the answer is yes. It's just the shayla. First opinion says, of course it's permitted. Second opinion learns out from the Hakesh, the comparison between makya adam makya behema. But listen to this. The Gemara says, Rav lo shavik libre lemishkale silu. So Rav would not allow his son to remove a splinter from his hand, right? So if Rav got a splinter, he would not let his son remove the splinter. Why not? Because again, it could cause bleeding, cause an injury. Mar breid Ravina lo shavik libre lemiftach lekavsa. So similarly, again, Mar, the son of Ravina, would not allow his son to literally open up a boil. Why not? Til machavile v'aveshigigas iser. Because if he would do it, chas v'shalom, if he could do it, or he wanted to lance the boil, to open up the boil to get the pasat, he wouldn't do it. Why? Because if his son would perhaps be a little bit too aggressive, he could cause an injury beyond the boil. So this is fascinating. So two great rabbanim who would not allow their children to help them, taking out a splinter, lancing a boil, because of concern that it could cause a chabura. The Gemara says, 1 second, Ihachi, if that's the concern, that someone may end up injuring someone in the course trying to help them, then it's not just the din in the son. Then no one else should be able to go out and lance the boil, take out the splinter. Ihachi acher nami, someone else should also not be permitted to take out the splinter or lance the boil. To which the Gemara says, no. Acher shigagas lav, bino shigagas chenek. Here's the big difference. If someone else is trying to take out the splinter and they accidentally injure me, okay, it's a lav. And it's an accidental lav. My son, if he does it, is an accidental chiyuv misa, chenek. So I will say, so what you see over here is this fascinating tension. So on one hand, when the Gemara asks, is a son allowed to essentially, quote unquote, injure his father for the purpose of healing him? The Gemara's question was with bloodletting. First two opinions, yes, hekish between make adam make behema. But yet again, you see Rav not allowing his son to take out the splinter, and Marbreid Ravina not allowing his son to lance the boil. So again, we're gonna stop over at this sugya today, but we'll continue more tomorrow. But the fundamental shaila is, what does this mean? So how do you reconcile it? Is it that they mamish hold that it's usher, that even if the son is trying to help, that Allah Lamaisa, again, a son is not allowed to do anything to a parent which could potentially result in injury to the parent? Or would they just be more machmir on themselves? Is there a distinction between where it's only the son is available to do it versus other people to do it? So that Meretz Hashem coming attractions. But the takeaway, but just important to understand, we have solidified the first line of the Mishnah, namely that clearly if a son or child does strike their parent and causes physical injury, that Allah Lamaisa, the punishment is chenek. We'll stop over for today. Can't wait to see everyone in person on Wednesday, and shkayach everyone.